Before we dive into today's presentation, I'd like to share a little bit about the Office of Small Business at Prosper Portland and how we can support you. Whether you are a small business owner looking to access City of Portland services, in need of help navigating Prosper Portland programs, or seeking local resources, we're here to support you. Think of us as your starting point or thought partner. We're here to guide you through the process and connect you to what you need. You can reach us anytime by visiting our website at pdxofficeofsmallbusiness.com. I'm going to drop it in the chat later, or give us a call at 503-241-4594. And with that, I'm excited to hand things over to our presenter today, Shauna Knight from Small Business Legal Clinic.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to attend, whether in person or watching the recording. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to be talking about legal risk management tools for businesses. And I did this presentation with our clinical professor, Susan. She handled the Spanish presentation. Before we get started too, I did want to mention that please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. I know that we can forget our questions, or we can, it might not be a lot of time at the end, especially since I probably overdid it on the number of slides I wanted to talk to you about today. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and I don't mind getting interrupted at all. So with that, I'm going to move on to the first lawyerly thing today, and that is going to be my disclaimer. As an attorney, I couldn't have a presentation without one. This is just for general information. This presentation isn't legal advice, and the Small Business Legal Clinic and the speakers are not your attorney. So if you have specific questions, confidential questions, please speak to an attorney about your specific circumstances. And please be careful not to put confidential information into your questions that you ask, since there's other folks that are here that could see or hear those questions. Also, if you are interested in becoming a client with us or with another attorney, feel free to ask your business advisor for a referral, or I'll have our contact information at the end too. So just a really quick agenda. We're going to talk about a little bit about who the heck am I? What is the Small Business Legal Clinic? We're going to talk about forming a business, what kind of risks that your business might face, and discuss tools to manage those risks. And then, of course, there's like the obligatory slide for questions, but please do feel free to ask questions when they come up. And we're going to talk mostly about 5 different legal tools. These are like the really main ways that you can manage risk to your business. So a little bit about the clinic. We provide transactional legal services to low-income small businesses. And transactional is like, what the heck is that even? It's not going to court. It's not fights, and it's not lawsuits. We're more like what happens between businesses, and how you might carry on your work. And I kind of think of us as more like preventive law. Like if you do this kind of work at the front end, you're less likely to have legal issues and legal problems further down the line. So things like forming your business, reviewing and writing contracts, helping you on employment matters, helping you protect your intellectual property like copyrights and trademarks and that kind of thing. And then also making sure that you understand your requirements to be in compliance with laws and regulations, so regulatory compliance. And these are kind of a big overview of the stuff that we can do and help you with. So there's our website and our phone number. I've also got it at the end, and I will see about dropping these in the chat too once I get closer to the end of the presentation. But also, if you don't have time to copy and paste from the chat, feel free to just Google Portland Small Business Legal Clinic and you'll find us. So first, I'm really curious about the folks who are watching right now, and we're going to talk about starting a business and how this kind of relates to things down the line. But I was wondering if anyone wanted to volunteer to answer a couple of questions about their business. or to talk about some of like the questions that you had when you started your business. And if you don't worry. Like I have a scenario made up for us, but it's always kind of fun to like talk about the businesses that are attending too. Okay, I am going to honor that no one feels like volunteering,
I
so
can
don't
talk about
worry.
my
Oh,
business that I
okay.
started.
Yeah, great. What does your business do or sell?
Well, I am a personality expert, or actually, I'm a belonging expert. And so, what I sell is online trainings, coaching, and consulting. My focus more is on businesses and how to work on teams and connect and work on conflict resolution. I created a trauma-informed coloring book
Cool.
for HR. And so I do have like a few products. I've written some books. I'm currently working on a dark personalities book on how people connect into people through personality. I'm also working on a diversity app for intersectionality around disability. So that's my business.
Wow, you are so busy. And as you were talking, I was just thinking about, oh, here's of all of the things that if you were starting brand new from scratch today, these are the kinds of things that I would think of, like, your coloring books and the books you've written. Intellectual property definitely comes right up. Like, do we want to have some copyrights
Hmm.
to protect those kinds of things and how those work? Also, contracts when you go and do
Yep.
speaking events and trainings, and also terms and conditions and stuff on your website.
Hmm.
And maybe you have a disclaimer like mine when you talk about, okay, before we get started, this isn't, legal advice, or, some of my clients have do trainings and they have to disclaim certain things. So this is really cool.
Like
And
I have to disclaim that I am not a counselor. I'm not a licensed counselor. I just have my MS in workplace psychology, and I have to say that I'm an industrial organizational psychology person, and so I have to disclose that. But I do have training in some things around like DBT and stuff. But I have to clarify I am not a licensed counselor.
awesome. So yeah, these are all things that you have to think about when you first start, and you probably are thinking about. Like for example, on their contracts, we learn lessons as we go, and sometimes we're amending our contracts as we like learn our lessons and be like, oh, this might be an easier way to do this, or I didn't like how this happened, so I'm going to change my contract around so it doesn't happen in the future. So thank you so much for volunteering. I really
Shanna,
appreciate learning. What's that?
we have another volunteer in the chat sharing they're starting an architecture firm.
Excellent, excellent. And so they probably do have licensing requirements. And so, making sure that they're licensed with the correct board and have all of those in. Luckily, a lot of folks, when they're doing their education and things, like they come across, they know that they're going to have to do this. Like, you're going to have to take this test, or you're going to have to get this license. But that is, just the start. What about your contracts? Do you work with individuals? Do you work with big contracting firms? Are you a subcontractor? Those are all good questions too that I think will connect with some of the things we talk about, because we talk about contracts and stuff today. Really interesting businesses. I love this work. I get to learn all kinds of new things all of the time. So I'm going to skip my scenario here because we already talked about different things that could come in. Like we talked a little bit about contracts and licensing, which is like a regulatory protection. We talked tiny, tiny bit about intellectual property protections. So these are the kinds of things that I'm going to be talking about as we kind of go through. Um, and then, so now I get to the unfun part. One thing that I do is I think a lot about things that can go wrong. And I know that you don't spend a lot of time on this, but it might occupy some of your time. And so that's probably why you're here today, is to learn a little bit more about legal protections and how you can like kind of close that liability hole, which we'll be talking about too. So in terms of like things that could go wrong, if anyone has any thoughts about things that they're worried about generally, or things that can happen when you have a small business.
Some things that can go wrong are like when people don't pay. That can be wrong. That so then you have to think about, how do I work with prepay, or do I do a partial payment, or things like that. Also, other things are insurance, making disclaimers around that. Those are super important, where you also have to say things along the lines of how you run your business, refunds, and insurance is huge in my area, and a lot of people do not understand that you have to have insurance. Even if no one ever sues you, that's a liability. And certification. Coaches do not need to be certified, neither do consultants in my field in IO psychology. However, there's a lot of like sticky areas that people can play with. So you have to have that insurance. You have to have integrity, because coaches really get a bad name because they haven't had a lot of integrity and things like that.
Thank you. And I also saw a hand raise. I can't see it anymore, but it was maybe Delaney or okay.
And we also have a few businesses in the chat
Mhm.
around art class or books. One comment shared copyright for their work.
Ah, yes. Definitely, we'll talk a little bit about copyrights. A lot of these topics kind of deserve their own presentation, but I will do my best to also kind of go into a little bit more on those when we get to those slides too. But yeah, these are all really good points. And so when I think about talking about our legal protections, kind of think about some of these strategies that we can use, like registering your copyright, that provide us and our small businesses with like a shield of protection. You're never going to get your liability risk down to zero, because we're living, breathing people, and just living doesn't ever bring your liability risk down to zero. But you can make it smaller and you can make it much more manageable so it doesn't take up a huge chunk of your day and doesn't like hang around and stress you out. And so just we'll be talking a little bit more about like these different sections when I think about the entrepreneur's liability shield. So we're going to talk a little bit about entity selection and formation. A lot of folks are established here, but hopefully this will be something that you can pass on as a mentor to someone else. Or if you are working as a sole proprietor right now, maybe this will encourage you to register an entity. We will be talking a little bit about insurance. We'll be talking about regulatory compliance, employment counseling. We'll talk a little bit about contracts, and we'll talk a little bit about intellectual property protections and how these all can help shield your business. So I've been dropping the word liability around already, and I shouldn't have. I should have waited until this slide so I could define it for you. So the definition of liability is just being responsible for something, especially by law. Like, and examples can be contracts you can write. It could be mistakes that you made that or someone else made that can come back on you. It could be intentional things. Accidents and liability happen all the time, and a lot of things are, who's responsible for that? Is it the small business? Is it the business owner? Is it going to be something that you can give away by contract? These are things that are definitely worth thinking about because a lot of us are worried about, are we properly licensed? Are we properly insured? Types of liability that you might encounter are, contracts liability, whether your contracts are written or oral, mistakes, or even just bad acts. And the bad acts could be like intent, like to be mean or hurtful, or it could just be like, you know what, I decided to save some money, but someone got hurt down the line. Also, regulatory or legal liability, like, how are you properly classifying your employees? Are you paying your taxes? Do you know what the zoning is going on? If you sell food or food services, like, are you making sure that you comply with local, state, and federal health requirements. And then, of course, like safety, if you are like we have like the architecture architects. I've not worked with a ton of architects, but I have worked a lot with folks in various areas of construction and safety, and figuring out those OSHA requirements, for example, are pretty key. And when you see all of this, you might get a little bit stressed out, like, oh my gosh, like, do I really want this? And it's like, don't worry, we can manage this stuff. But just remember when you started your business, you are no longer just an expert in the things that you do. You also have to put on your hat to do marketing and to do your books and to do all of these different things and juggle all of these things. So this isn't necessarily that it's so going to be so overwhelming. It just seems that you want to be aware of and you want to know about how you want to mitigate those. So the first step, I'm going to talk a little bit about entity selection and formation. Your choices can affect how you're going to be taxed, how you're going to operate, who is going to be liable for those mistakes, those contracts, those acts. And for some people, it's really important for them to be able to bring on investors. The choice and how you register your business can have an effect on that. So the biggest considerations of those factors is probably going to be your liability and your taxation. I can already tell you that I am super, I really, really support the idea of registering your business and getting that and that liability protection out of it. But there's all kinds of businesses, and people have been doing business for way longer than laws have been on the books. So there's all kinds of different ways that you can handle this. So there's a couple of definitions I've thrown up on the screen right now. And I'll just kind of go through them really quickly. Like a sole proprietor is just you by yourself deciding to do the thing. You haven't registered anything, you haven't created a business name, you are just, going to a farmer's market and selling things, or you creating a website and selling services, or, you're doing things for pay for like, on a referral basis. Maybe this is a full-time job, maybe this is a part-time job, but it's something that's just you doing by yourself. The general partnership is you doing it with someone else or multiple someone else's. So that could be you and a friend, you and your partner, or you and several other people doing things, but nothing's on the books, but you're already holding yourself out to people as, doing this and running this business. So it's not formal at all, but you are, if you're selling something, you are doing either sole proprietorship or general partnership, and you may not know it. The one that a lot of people first think of is corporations. There's a couple of different kinds. There's the C corporation, and then there's the S corporation. The S corporation is not actually a new entity. It's just a filing that you do with the IRS to be taxed like an LLC. And then my favorite is the limited liability company, or the LLC. That is the kind of business that with my clients, I usually see folks that are smaller, businesses, or they're starting up, and I just really love how flexible LLCs are. And I will talk a little bit more about that. So when we're talking about liability, LLCs and corporations, all kinds of corporations, are going to be on the low end of exposure. So corporations and LLCs have the same kind of limited liability protections, where if you properly form your LLC or your corporation and you have a separation between yourself personally and your business, and this can include registering your business, making sure you have, your documentation, making sure you're not sharing out your bank account with your business, things like that, you're going to have really low exposure to personal liability, and your business will actually take on the liability. So if someone were to sue you, but you had a well-maintained LLC, for example, there's a good chance that they would be able to sue the LLC, but not you personally. They couldn't go after your home or your car or your personal assets. Whereas a general partnership and a sole proprietorship have all the exposure. There are no protections against liability when you have a general partnership or a sole proprietorship. So that's something to kind of consider in how you want to move forward. So I want to talk a little bit more about how entities can shield different kinds of businesses. I think this is really important because as a lawyer, I am really scared for businesses who are engaging as sole proprietors or as general partners. If they know this information and they've chosen to take that risk, that's one thing, but I feel like a lot of people don't know this. So let's talk a little bit about it. So I'm going to make up this pretend lady. Her name's Liz, and she started a business called Glow Sticks. So she has a contract, and her contract would deliver 100 glow sticks by 6 p.m. for a music concert. However, something happened, and the glow sticks did not arrive until 9 p.m. after the concert was over. So, what are we talking about in terms of liability? First, you have your contract liability. The business isn't its own entity, it's just Liz doing her own thing. So the liability is going to pass straight to her. So this means that if she doesn't have enough money in her business account to cover all the damages that are caused from her not delivering the glow sticks on time, um, and a lot of that liability can be listed out in the contract, she might have to pay for this personally. She's basically personally guaranteeing every single business decision she makes. But let's add another layer onto this. And let's say Liz knows she's late and she is speeding really fast when she's going to deliver the glow sticks and she rear-ended someone. So this is personal liability. The business isn't its own legal entity. The business can't protect her from that liability, so that she's going to be personally responsible for all of the injuries, all of the damages caused by hurting someone when she was speeding. So this is something to consider for a sole proprietor if you want to have the business protect you. It's not going to protect from everything, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it will protect you from a lot of this kind of liability. So now I'm going to talk about partnership, and believe it or not, this is actually worse. So if you have a general partnership, no LLC, no corporation, and you guys are just working together and doing these glow sticks, let's go through some scenarios. So Dan decided to purchase 3 boxes of super cheap, but also super toxic neon glow powder for the company. And then he never paid for that. So first of all, you've got contract liability. The business isn't its own legal entity, so liability is going to pass through to both owners. Even though Liz had nothing to do with this, she is also going to be like, say, for example, if there's not enough money in the business account to pay for that bill, and Dan doesn't have any money, Liz is going to have to pay for this. And then like we mentioned that was really toxic glow powder. Kids play with glow sticks all the time, and those glow sticks break. So what happens if someone's daughter ate one of the glow sticks and they got really sick? So this is going to be personal liability because the business isn't its own entity, and the liability created will pass through both owners. Also, because there was a situation where Dan knew this stuff was toxic, but he bought it anyway, that might be a kind of liability that would pass through to the owners, depending on the circumstances, even with an entity. So if you do something personally where you're like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and not follow the law, or I'm going to do something dangerous because I think it's going to be okay, and then it isn't. If you do that deliberately like that, and I'm not talking about like general business acts, I'm talking about like buying poison powder that you know could be ingested by children. That's the kind of thing that could pass through even if you have an entity. And that's why things like insurance and things like that are going to become important later on. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about this scenario and really quickly because you guys can kind of guess where I'm going, right? If you had that super toxic glow powder and you didn't pay for it, contract liability is not going to be a problem for Liz and Dan personally, as long as they have a separate entity and it's well maintained, meaning they've got their registration in order, they have like an operating agreement or their bylaws in order, and they're doing all of the things and they're keeping their lives separate from their business. They're going to be okay, and the business is going to take on this liability. However, like I said before, under these circumstances, you might have personal liability attached to definitely Dan and maybe even Liz if she knew about it and didn't object or something like that happened. So those are things to kind of keep in mind, and how much an entity, like registering an LLC, for example, could protect you from some liability. A little bit about entity formation. You don't do nothing with sole proprietorship or general partnerships. You just hold yourself out as a business. More formal is for limited liability companies and corporations. You go over to the Oregon Secretary of State, you pay to register your entity, and you make sure that you pay every year, and you make sure you keep that up. So if you're talking about how much work is required, we might say that, for a sole proprietorship, it's like, hi, I'm this business, here's my product or here's my service. For a partnership, you maybe have an agreement that's written down between the partners, but sometimes you don't even have that, and you're just holding yourself out. For an LLC, you've got a couple more documents. You want to have an operating agreement. You want to have your business registered with the Secretary of State. And then, like I said, you're going to have to pay. Right now, it's $100 a year to have an LLC in Oregon. Corporations, okay, I'm just going to keep clicking the buttons here. Corporations are a lot more work. You've got to have your bylaws. You've got to have your meetings. You've got to have maybe shareholder agreements. There's a lot more paperwork and a lot more work that goes into protecting corporations. But, and this is one of the reasons why I like LLCs so much. LLCs carry the same amount of liability protections as corporations, and they're really flexible. And they can be as big or small as you want. Like they could be one person or they could be a bunch of people. Like keep in mind that Google is an LLC. So I will just put that down for anyone who's on the fence of thinking about what kind of entity they want. LLCs are pretty fantastic, but both will provide really good protections. It's just that corporations take a lot of work to maintain. So like I said, yeah, voting, meetings, paperwork, all that money. I want to talk a little bit about taxation of corporations versus LLCs. Basically, everything comes down to whether you're going to be taxed twice or you're going to have something called pass-through or flow-through taxation. So a corporation, a regular corporation, is going to be taxed twice. I'll go into that in the next slide. S corps, which is just basically a corporation or LLC that filed an IRS filing, and LLCs just have, like, they're just whatever they're the owners, whether they're shareholders or they're members, if you're an LLC, whatever you make, that's what gets taxed. So here is a very oversimplified example of how you might get taxed if you had a corporation that was just a regular corporation. If you made $100,000, you're going to have a 21% tax for the corporation on that 100,000. And then what's left over after that 21,000 is taken over is going to be like split up in half between the shareholders. Here I just have two, but there might be more. And then each shareholder has to pay their taxes. And when that's all kind of put together, when you kind of include the tax on the corporation and the tax on the shareholders, altogether, that's like $32,850 of taxes. But if you have an LLC or you have an S Corp, your taxation is passed through. You do not get taxed on what the LLC makes. You just get the members just get taxed. And also I have a little note on the qualified business income deduction. This is due to phase out after this year, but right now there's like a 20% off the top relief on taxation. So when the income comes to the members, say it's 100,000, so 50,000 for each member, they're only going to be taxed on 40,000 of that because of that qualified business income deduction. But keep an eye on that. I'm hopeful that there'll be something that continues that. But right now it's going to end in December. So we'll have this protection for this year, but not next year. But assuming, oh, I think I see that Delaney has her hand raised.
Yes. I just have a question. So member income, would that be like a owner contribution? I mean, owner withdrawal?
No, so if, for example, if you made $100,000 and you decided to put all of it back into the LLC, um, like maybe you were going to have a second location if you were like a spa or a restaurant, for example, or you wanted to, buy some new equipment or something like that, you're still going to be taxed on that 100,000, even if you don't take that as a draw. So it's basically like the tax code basically acts as if the LLC isn't even there, and it's just going to say like, what did you make? Now, when you file your taxes, you also get to tell it your deductions. So hopefully you won't be looking at that whole entire tax amount. You'll also get deductions for being a small business owner and doing these different things in your community. But even if you don't take that as a personal deduction, you still are going to be taxed on whatever amounts that the business makes minus its deductions. But compare like these numbers, like assuming made up 22% tax rate, each member is going to pay 8,800 on that 100,000 of taxes or 100,000 of income. Compare that 17,600 to like the over 30,000 that a corporation would be taxed on. So that's why it's really important to know about like the tax implications of these different entities. So an S corporation, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. You basically get to anyone who's doing all of the work of the corporation. LLCs can also register as S corps. Definitely speak with an accountant before you look at any of these. I generally don't see them a lot in my work because you have to be paying yourself a reasonable salary, which is not like how much the business makes is reasonable, but like how much a CEO of a company similar to you would be bringing home. That's how much you got to make in order to do this. And I work with pretty small businesses, so a lot of folks don't decide to go after the S Corp. There's also a lot of limitations on S Corps. You can only have like so many owners. You can't have your S Corp owned by like a nonprofit, for example. You have to file additional paperwork and forms. So it's not something that I see often, but you might have heard about S Corps when you were doing research about your business. So I just wanted to touch on that. I see them more in things like where all the employees own the business. Like I see them more in things like that.
And
I also wanted to,
Shauna,
yeah.
there's a question in the chat. LLCs not taxed as C Corp, are they the same as sole proprietor?
So LLCs are taxed depending on how many members there are. So if you are one member owned LLC, you're going to be taxed just the same as a sole proprietor, but you'll have all the liability protections. If you have more than one member, it's like you and a friend or you and a partner, you are going to be taxed like a general partnership. So there's like an extra form out there. I think it's a Schedule K that you're going to want to file, or Chapter K that you're going to want to file. It's not a huge form. And there's a lot of resources on the irs.gov website on this too. But yeah, you as a LLC, a single member LLC is taxed like a sole proprietor, and an LLC with more than one member is going to be taxed like a general partnership. Okay, and I really want to touch quickly on benefit companies. This is something that is very specific to Oregon companies. I don't know if other states are doing this, but if you have the kind of goal to give back to your community, whether it's people or the planet, or you want to share your profits, You should consider a benefit company, but I don't think it's something you want to pounce on right in the beginning. I usually see companies doing this after they've been around for like 5 years-ish. But basically what it does is it allows you to, you know, work with a third-party certifier to help get your company to be recognized as a benefit. Like if you see like, for example, B Lab is one of the third-party certifiers that you can work with, and you can get the certified B corporation that can apply. You can get this even if you're an LLC. Um, but there's all kinds of different third-party certifiers out there, and Oregon law and the Oregon Secretary of State actually allow you to amend your like LLC or your corporation filing for this. Just make sure that if you go after this, you work with a third-party certifier, and then you work with an attorney to amend your bylaws or your operating agreement and to amend your LLC or corporation filing. And you'll also, there's a requirement that you do like a annual report to say how you're giving back to the community. But if this is something of interest, you want to like make a profit, but you also want to give back, this is like a pretty fabulous marketing opportunity, but also just kind of shows that, you care about one of these things when you're also operating your business. So I just wanted to touch on that. All right, so now I'm going to dive into insurance, complete topic switch. So there's so many different kinds of insurance out there. There's insurance out there that could cover things like errors and omissions. If you are a professional, you might want to have professional liability insurance. For example, lawyers, doctors, counselors, all have different liability insurance. Other kinds of folks, like people in construction, might have bonds, which is kind of like a kind of insurance. And insurance can cover all kinds of different things. They can cover your car, your commercial car insurance. So if like Dan in that one scenario had rear-ended you, um, and instead of it bouncing back on him individually, if he had insurance, insurance might help protect against that. Some insurance is required by law. Like for example, if you have employees, you've got to have workers' compensation insurance or workers' comp, basically. Sometimes you'll have them required by contracts, like if you work an event or if you lease a space, almost actually cross that out. Every single lease I've ever seen requires some liability insurance. So general liability insurance is the one I most commonly see, and that can protect against harm that your business does or your employees or you in the course of business due to other businesses or other property. So like say, for example, if you're a restaurant and someone gets food poisoning, that general liability insurance could come in and protect you against those kinds of situations. There's also insurance can be kind of cool in this issue. Sometimes insurance companies will send out their own attorneys to defend you in situations. So definitely read your policies and understand them about what they can do. Also get property insurance if you are leasing a space or if you have equipment and things like that. Like and pay attention to your deductible. Can you afford that deductible if you got wiped out by a fire, for example? Your property insurance will protect you. Liability insurance protects, someone else, whether it's your landlord or your customer or something like that. Also, there's things like health insurance. Health insurance can help you attract and maintain your employees. So there's all kinds of different insurance, professional liability insurance, general liability insurance. There's business interruption insurance, which if you're ever interested in doing, make sure you talk to an attorney first. Like during COVID, when all of the businesses were closed down, business closure, like interruption insurance, almost never paid out. Only if like the words illness or sickness or something appeared in those contracts. So keep in mind that your insurance policy is a contract. Read it. Feel free to bring it to an attorney to review it for you too. You want to make sure that it's protecting you for the things you think it's protecting you from. So, I'm also keep an eye on the time for you guys. Okay. So, regulatory compliance, this is just basically complying with the law. Some industries are really heavily regulated. Like, for example, if you're a doctor, you have like all kinds of requirements. Or if you're doing construction on houses where people are going to live, you're going to have a lot of requirements. It can be like a big challenge to follow between OSHA or between making sure that you've got all the inspections you're supposed to have for your business. So one thing that I would say is really unique to Oregon is that the regulatory agencies here are so amazing. They want to help you before you get in trouble, and they want to help you be in compliance. So even if you aren't like in talks with an attorney, if you're thinking about doing something new and you're not sure if it complies or not, feel free to reach out ahead of time. And that's really key. Don't reach out after you've already done the thing and get yourself in trouble. Reach out before you do the thing and ask for help, whether it's OSHA, whether it's Bureau of Labor and Industries. Folks there are really, really helpful. I've even, with like my food cart clients, I've even had the county health inspector come out and look at food trucks before you buy them to make sure that they're all up to code for the class of food that you want to sell and make. So definitely make sure that you know about these resources too. It's not all like that you're going to be buckled under all of these laws and it's so overwhelming. There's lots of resources out there for you too. And the regulations are good. They make sure that we're following the law. They make sure that other people are kind of held to the same standards so we don't have unfair competition. And then also, if you're following the law and someone still gets hurt, this can also kind of help minimize your liability because you were using, reasonable standards to do these things. Your insurance company is going to love you for this. But then also this can help make sure that you have less accidents, have less problems if you're in compliance. So there can be some, or there can be a whole ton of compliance issues that you're under zoning. I can just keep listing all of these examples. But if you need help with these, please reach out. Reach out to your business advisor, reach out to an attorney like me or someone else that you trust, and reach out to these agencies too. They're really helpful. Um, so I'm not going to read all of these for you, but I want to say that we can also help with some employment issues. Probably every time I do a presentation on employees, we all get stuck talking about the difference between an employee versus an independent contractor. I want to put you on to this free guide, the Oregon Employers Guide. It's on the Oregon Secretary of State site. It's a huge book. Like, you don't have to sit down and read it like in one sitting, but use it as a guidebook if you have employees. It has checklists, it has all kinds of things that can help. There's some things that you're going to be required to have by law. Are you doing all of these things? You can work with an attorney to make sure you're following these because this is what regulatory compliance again, right? But you can also do a lot of stuff, with your mentors or looking at this employer's guide and making sure that, you've got those questions answered. I see Nicole has her hand raised.
This was after you just said a second ago around contacting you all. Do you still have to have a referral to contact? You don't. Okay.
No, we do have an intake form on our website. So you can just go in and fill out an intake form and then we'll reach it back out to you. The referrals are always kind of nice, especially if there's grants or something in play. This is like a really tough year for grants for everyone. So I don't think we have a lot of those on the ground right now. So if you just want to come through and talk to someone, maybe you just want to have a consultation, or maybe you want us to like write you a contract, feel free to fill out like our intake form on our website. So let's see. Oh, a couple of things I wanted you guys to know. These are things that maybe you are not thinking about. You're probably thinking about payroll and you're thinking about taxes. But I do want to point out, because so many of my clients have not been aware of them, is there are some required handbook policies that are required by law. Like if you have over 50 employees, the feds require like a family medical leave policy, for example. Oregon for all employees requires like a sexual harassment policy, and they've actually written it for you, like right in the law. So that's really helpful to have. And there's just some other policies. I would also recommend on top of the Oregon Employers Guide to go check out BOLI's website. BOLI is the Bureau of Labor and Industries, and they have like questions if you're an employee, questions if you're an employer, and they will go through a whole bunch of this stuff for you. And they've done things like amassed all the posters that you have to have for your employees and things like that. They're super helpful. And you can also reach out to them and talk to a human being too. All of these things are also things that lawyers can help with. So it kind of depends on like what is more dear to you, your time or your money. If you have more time to work on it yourself and do the research, I think these are things that you can do a pretty good job with on the Oregon Employers Guide, talking to BOLI, and then hiring out for things that you might have difficulties with, like making sure your payroll software, or you hire a payroll company that does that. If you don't have a lot of time, but you really want to make sure you're in compliance with this, that might be a really good time to work with a lawyer on these. Or if you're working with something that isn't really clear from the employer's guide, like you've got a really unique situation, that's a really good time too. Okay, contracts. So contracts are kind of cool for lawyers and business owners, because this is an area of law where people were just doing contracts with each other. And then all of a sudden, like the rich landowners, like back in Yale, England or whatever, were like, oh my gosh, we have to put rules around these. But a lot of contract law is more common sense. You can put anything in a contract as long as it's not illegal. And it just kind of defines like who's going to be responsible for liability, what happens if things go wrong, how much things are going to cost. It just kind of defines the relationship between the parties. Contracts can take up so many different iterations. You can have a lease, you can have sales agreements, you can have service agreements if you provide a service. You might have multiple service agreements if you have multiple kinds of services. If you have a website, you probably have terms and conditions and privacy policies. If you have, information that you've worked really hard on, know-how, secret recipes, your marketing stuff, things that are like internal to your company, you might want to have a non-disclosure agreement, both with your business partners, but also with your employees. Operating agreements are a kind of contract. It's like if you're a single member LLC, it's basically a contract between you and your company. And then that's kind of funny because you have to sign twice, because you sign on behalf of your company and on behalf of yourself as the member. A little silly, but does a lot to protect you. If you have a properly formed operating agreement, that's going to help protect you from business liability. And that's part of the like making sure that your LLC or your corporation, for example, is properly set up. For all of these other things, even something like a non-disclosure agreement is like a small contract where you're saying, hey, if you're using this, you understand that you're taking this risk, or that we're only providing the service up to this far, and you need to talk to a medical professional or a lawyer or someone else who has expertise in this area. I do want to say that I want you guys to be careful with AI contracts. Those are becoming bigger and bigger, and even at the school where I work, students are learning about how to use AI in legal work. And I think that it can be possibly a helpful tool, but there are a lot of issues with it, not even touching on intellectual property issues like we're seeing in the news with all the lawsuits where things are being stolen and used to teach AI. AI uses a ton of energy and water. There's like a town in Tennessee right now that is like fighting with Elon Musk because over clean air issues. So there's those issues too, but also AI kind of takes whatever you give it. So it can learn inaccurate information and feed that to you. And then you think you have a contract and it's no good. It can also hallucinate. And this is when it wants to give you the thing you want and it just makes something up. It will just literally make something up. And so you want to be sure you avoid that. If you're working with AI, the things that I can say is make sure you feed it things that you know are true. Like, for example, if you have like a document, like a contract you're working on, Make sure you redact it because remember, AI learns from everything, including our confidential information. Make sure you redact or delete anything you don't want the AI to use. And then, also tie it to true sources that you've already vetted and exist. But I will say that anytime that I've come in contact with an AI generated contract, whether it's from Rocket Lawyer or ChatGPT, I end up having to charge my clients a lot more to fix it than if I had just written a new one from scratch. So I know that a lot of folks are looking at this as an option, and it just navigate it with care, be very careful and read everything. Basically, if you take an AI contract, look it over as if it's being handed to you by someone who's on the opposite side of a negotiating table from you. So just be really careful with those. I don't recommend them at this time, but I know that sometimes folks are relying on them. So the people that you are negotiating with may be relying on AI contracts. So definitely review their contracts too in case they've got some things in there they shouldn't. And these things can be like, I've seen really high, like 120% interest rates on things. I've seen it where someone used, or like I worked with a student to use AI to review a long lease, and it was like, I don't know, like a 70-page lease. And the AI thing, after we'd redacted it and everything, they're like, oh, I found 8 things that could be wrong with this lease. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, I found 8 things wrong with this lease in the first 3 pages. So that's not something you want to rely on. So just kind of bear that in mind if you do work with AI or if you suspect that the other party might be working with an AI generated contract. Oh, also, if you are signing a contract on behalf of your business, do not forget to add your title into your signature. Like, say, for example, if I owned an LLC, I would be a member. So when I signed, I would sign Shauna Knight, comma, member. So, and if you're a shareholder, you might be a shareholder or you might be an officer, you might be the president or something. Make sure you add your title in when you sign anything on behalf of your company. And this will protect you from personal liability because some judges have decided that if you just sign your name, it's as good as a personal guarantee, and you do not want that to happen. Okay, oh my gosh. Okay, we're running short on time. I want to be respectful of your guys' time. So the 5th step and the last step that I'll really go into are intellectual property protections. Your books, your presentations, your designs, your websites, your business name, your business logo, your inventions, improvements to inventions, your designs. These are all things that could be intellectual property. And so there's different ways you can protect them. Like, for example, trade secrets, they're only really protected if you keep them secret. So you want a good NDA to have not only with your business partners, but like any employees you have. Copyrights protect things like literature, music, websites, software development. And those are protected as soon as you like affix them, like they're final in your Word document, or it's the final bit of paint or the final bit of kiln fire, just like it's ready and affixed to something and it's not just in your head. However, having a copyright registration is really nice because those come with all kinds of like damages. For example, if someone infringes on your copyright and the judge agrees with you, triple damages. So if they caused you $10,000 worth of damages, they now owe you $30,000 worth of damages. Copyright registration is also really nice. Copyrights are housed within the Library of Congress, and librarians have created how-to videos and all kinds of things for you. They're really, really accessible, and you can learn a lot by going to the copyright website, and you can do copyrights yourself. They're like 50, 55 bucks each. If you want to work with an attorney, I also do copyright. Sometimes it's helpful if you're not sure, or if you want to do it with your first copyright with an attorney to see what it looks like. Or maybe you have like kind of a complicated copyright to do. That's a good time to work with an attorney. Trademarks are for like your business name, your business logo. Sometimes, if you have like taglines or if you have really special packaging, these things can be trademarked. Trademarks are something that you can do by yourself, but the how-to videos are not very helpful. And I would just say if you try to tackle this by yourself, make sure you have a lot of time. My first trademark that I ever did was over 10 hours of work because I was having to learn the process. And this is after law school. So I learned all the law about trademarks and it did not help me with their program at all. It's pretty awful to work with. So if you can work with an attorney, be aware though that they're really expensive. Trademarks right now, the registration fee, not counting like attorney's fees, is like $350 each. So those can be quite expensive. And there's different times you might want to do a trademark in your business. It's really personal to you and wanting to protect your business name, for example, or being okay with waiting until you're more established to do a trademark. That's definitely, if you're not sure, but you're curious about it, that might be something you want to have a consultation with an attorney with before you tackle one altogether. Patents are interesting animals. These are for inventions, improvements to inventions and designs. I can't talk a lot about them because I actually can't practice patent law. In order to practice patent law, you have to have an undergraduate degree in science or engineering, and I do not. So the SBLC does have a really limited patent clinic. They can take on like a couple of clients a year, and a professor works with students to help small businesses get their patents. But it's a really expensive process. It's a long process. So we're only able to help a few clients a year with this. But that is also something we do, and also something you might be interested in. If not through us, then maybe with someone else. Yeah, if you've got the best product name ever, you might be looking at a trademark.
Now we have a question
Yeah.
in the chat. Can you help with copywriting? Nicole, do you mean copywriting or copyrights?
Yeah, copyrights. Because I actually was working with the copyright office, and then they said you didn't, you made a mistake, and then they took my money and then didn't give me a copyright. It was
Oh
like,
no.
yeah. And I'm like, wait a second here. Like, you didn't respond in time. And I was like, wait a second. You guys weren't clear on what you wanted, and they filled out the forms and no one's helping me. And I have a, yeah, it's a lot.
So
Yeah.
the SBLC can't help with fights, like
Yeah.
basically like getting your money back, for example. I would say that if you pay a fee to the Copyright Office or the Trademark US Patent and Trademark Office, treat that like an administrative fee. You will not see it again, even if you don't get your copyright or your trademark. Um, but yeah, in terms of helping you get one from start to finish, that's something that we can help with. Or if you needed help amending yours and doing the paperwork, like or filing a new one, we could help with that. But in terms of, unfortunately, like helping you navigate this situation, if you're trying to get like a refund of your fees or to try to get them to kind of back down because, you didn't see the notification, that's probably not something the SBLC can help with. But there are some really great firms, around Portland that do this kind of work too that might be able to help.
No, it's more about making sure that it's filed properly. I'm
Okay,
okay if,
yeah.
yeah, because I mean, it was like $85 or something like that. By the
Ugh.
time you get a firm involved, it's not worth it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we definitely help with copyrights. I've done some for music, some for cookbooks, some for classes. They're pretty I think they're pretty straightforward compared to trademarks. So that's definitely something that the SBLC can help with too. Okay. So now we've kind of thought about like all of those things, those risks that we talked about at the beginning, making sure you have your insurance, making sure your copyrights are protected and you have that intellectual property protection. No one really brought up entity selection information, but that's in there too in case you need it or in case you're mentoring someone who might need it. And then all of the things about making sure that you're in compliance with like the different kinds of laws, including employment laws. So these things, like I said, your risk is never going to be like zero. But you can take your risk, your liability risk from a whole lot and then bring that down into a really manageable amount where you're not losing sleep at night in running your business. And these are really a great idea to use multiple of these things, like having your entity, having multiple contracts, having your insurance, rather than just relying on one of them, and you'll get some of the best protection. All right. I'm a few minutes over. I'm so sorry for trampling on your time, but thank you so much for bearing with me.